Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Almost Dropouts podcast. I'm your host, Daivik, and today I have my friend Zulphkar with me. Zulphkar, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Daivik. So my name is Zulphkar. I am a mechanical engineering student at the University of Waterloo, graduating in 2022 now, and I'm also currently working at Apple as part of the iPhone quality for my internship.
And you might have heard Zulphkar in our Q&A special. He was one of the panelists on that. But I was asking like you should come on a your own podcast as well, talk about some of your experiences and stuff. And yeah, here he is. So yeah, let's start about. Usually we start with Waterloo engineering, especially with people with Waterloo. Talking about their experiences, adjusting in first year, time management, productivity, stuff like that. So what were your experiences in uWaterloo engineering like, and how did you adjust to it?
Yeah, for sure. Going back even to before I started at Waterloo, um, I knew that heading into Waterloo, it was going to be much bigger challenge than the other university that I applied for, which was University of Alberta. Just because Waterloo has some of the best competition, like in Canada, and one of the things that actually ended up uh, happening was I ended up thinking that at the beginning I was going to totally suck when I came into Waterloo. Like I would be totally on the latter half of the class, not do as well, but I was still willing to kind of bet on myself because I knew
Mm-hmm.
that if I were to able to capitalize on my opportunity going to Waterloo with all these internships, uh, the potential that I had was going to be much greater than what I uh, could have if I were to go to like
Mm-hmm.
University of Alberta, right? So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it was like going to Waterloo had a higher chance of like me potentially failing first year, which was like a big thing that I did consider. And I think
Yeah.
honestly, one of the things it was good that I was like courageous to kind of bet on myself and say that I can kind of do it, and that
Mm-hmm.
the risks would be much better than the rewards. But I think before I even gone to Waterloo, um, I personally thought that I might have not been good enough, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's something that other students might feel as well. But
Mm-hmm.
when I after like after a little bit after first year, I ended up realizing that I'm not like as trash as I thought, right? So I'm pretty much average. So um, that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out to anyone that's like going into, I guess, even any situation. Like you
Yeah.
always have that imposter syndrome, but like I think it's so important to kind of believe in yourself, and that's like one
You know
of the
what's
first
funny about that?
key things that you
Yes, sir.
should
Go ahead.
do. Like you going into that you should be mindful of whenever you're doing anything.
You
Yeah,
know what's
say
funny
what?
about that? I was of the complete opposite mentality. I'm like, yo, I'm killing it in high school. I'm gonna be good. I'm gonna be like all these guys are saying that. Oh, your average drops. Nothing like all that's gonna happen. And I was like, nah, that isn't gonna happen to me. I'm too smart for this. Like, I'll be good. And so yeah, I was on the other side of the boat where I came into Waterloo and I was like, oh my god, I'm failing. I failed half my midterms. What the hell just happened? And
Oh my
so
goodness.
but even then, like I think even from that point of view, that's something really important you said there was the betting on yourself thing. And I knew that like even though I went from one point to the other point, from a really high point to a really low point real quick, I think what was really important for me was I was still able to recover from it and like make it through. I definitely learned a lot of different things, and I realized that um, a I don't know everything, and to be ready for anything, and b um, that if I hit a low point, I can still try to pick myself up and try to get like scrap through things. And so, like you said, shout out Fred Van Fleet because this is his slogan. But bet on yourself, bro.
Yeah, like for me
um,
though, like it was I had a much more different like experience in high school where um, I wasn't like getting good grades. I didn't even do AP or IB all that, and like thinking that the people that I was going to compete against were some of the people that had gone through that course load, or were like valedictorians for their from their class, some of the brightest students. I was like, I literally got my first 90 in like grade 11. So I was totally, I totally felt that I wasn't really ready, and then I kind of slipped in somehow. So like
Hmm.
that's one of the reasons why I felt even more. I had an even more like case of like imposter syndrome.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really weird though. Actually, there's a lot of students in Waterloo who have this imposter syndrome, and to that, like the thing I always say to them, or like I always think, is that there's a reason you got into the university, and if the university didn't think you'd be like able to handle it, or you'll be able to get through the program, you wouldn't have been admitted in. And so,
Yeah.
like with anybody really feeling that imposter syndrome, that's the biggest thing I would say. Like, there's a reason you got in. The university does this every year. They know what they're doing. I think they have it down to a key. So, like, definitely don't feel like you have that imposter syndrome. Just give it your all, and we'll see what happens.
And yeah, even to
Um,
go a little bit more on that, like looking at the grade distribution for the incoming class this year, um, I feel like Waterloo is getting so many applicants now, and I feel like a lot of the students who might not have gone in could have actually done really well if they'd gone through the Waterloo system. But it's just that now, like if you can get in, you should for sure, on it from an academic standpoint, be able to like carry and do success, do well.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it's getting more and more competitive per year. So let's see
Yeah.
how it goes. But I think one of the unique things to Waterloo, but I know it's sort of like remains true for a lot of universities, of course, as well, is that trying to find a job. And specific to Waterloo, though, like we have to find jobs every 4 months because that's just how all the engineering programs are laid out. And so, with that, what is the importance of trying to find a job, or like what are some tips you have for trying to find a job when you first enter university, or just in general? And yeah.
Oh my goodness. So to give you guys a bit of background, we didn't have it as easy as mechanical engineering students as like electrical, like Daivik, or computer,
Computer,
sorry,
bro, computer. Put some
computer.
respect.
Um, and for us, it was very difficult to find that job, find our first job, especially because with the stream that I was in, stream four, we started building our application a week or 2 weeks in to our like school semester. So like as O week was winding down, that's when we started thinking about how are we uh, going to present ourselves to some of these employers, right?
Hmm.
I think the most important thing is to be persistent. For me, this was even more the case. I ended up getting, I think I applied to all the jobs in main round, and like it, the importance, the reason why you should be persistent is because you'll see other people who end up getting interviews, showing up to their like class with like suits on, and you'd be like, God dang, I don't have an interview yet. Like, makes you feel like
Yeah.
crap. But what you have to keep mindful of is really trying to make sure that you keep applying. Like you can see, for me, I think the first time I ended up like to get my first interview, I had to apply to like 250 or 300 jobs, and I ended up
Hmm.
only getting one interview during my first co-op rounds. So like
Yeah.
that was pretty intimidating, um, and like I had a lot of pressure to kind of perform. And your boy Davik here helped me out with preparing for that interview. So once you like, you really have to make sure that you keep on applying. To a point, your resume does like really play a role, especially. But it's really hard to build a great tailored resume, especially if you don't have a lot of experience. So if you don't have a
Hmm.
lot of experience, I think your best bet is just keep on applying.
Hmm. And I think you touched on it really well. Like I think one of these misnomers that some people have when they come into Waterloo is that I gotta get the perfect job right now. my first co-op, but that couldn't be further than the truth. Like honestly, at the end of the
Yeah,
day, your first engineering job is just so you can get some relevant engineering experience into whatever field you want to go into. And if you
yeah,
get that in any form, doesn't matter what the pay is, doesn't matter what the experience is. If you get any of that, like that's gonna really double or triple the value of your resume right there. So definitely like just being persistent, knowing that it's part of the process. I think is a big part of that, and just not giving up. I think that's probably the hardest thing with the whole trying to find a job in first year type of thing.
yeah. Like my boy Sid says, it's really a war, not a battle. I'll touch on
Mm-hmm.
this a little bit more in the later part of the podcast, but you have to be very mindful of like how what your end goal is, and that this is one of the internships that you're going to be completing during your time here. So it's very important to not get too down on like one single interview cycle if you haven't been performing well. It's just keeping in mind what the bigger picture is, and that this is not the end all. This is not the end, right? So you have to be
Mm-hmm.
kind of mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think, all right, transitioning a little bit. I think one of the more interesting things about Waterloo is that, or like one of the big stigmas in Waterloo is that you're coming into Waterloo. There's like no parties. There's no you're not gonna have fun. Like it's a very dead university. And to a degree, okay, to a degree, I'm not gonna lie. Compared to other universities, there is that to a degree. But based on your experiences, what how have you learned to balance the work and still having like fun on the side, or having fun, and b, how do you learn how to learn? Because I know that's one other thing, when you're coming into university, not knowing like how the system's going to be, that takes an adjustment time. And so with that, how did you help yourself with that?
Yeah, like I think for a lot of people, the first semester is really about learning about yourself. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to first learn how you can like handle certain situations. And it's really important for you to first understand how can you kind of balance work, sorry, school, and like having fun and having like good mental
Mm-hmm.
health. And I think what you first might think is that when you come to Waterloo, or like when you have so much to learn, what you have to do is like lock yourself in a room and just learn for like 24 hours, 24/7. And that's for me. I've learned that that's not really the case. It's really important to have like switch up where you're studying, do something fun, and have some treats for yourself after you accomplish something. So for us, that was like going out to party, going out to drink, and like after midterms, whatever. Like you you bombed your midterms, great, have fun, like get it out of your system, because if you end up like going straight to the books right after like doing so terribly like on a midterm, let's say, all you're going to do is like dig yourself into a bigger hole in terms of like your mental health. So like what you have to realize is that your you have to do well in your midterms as well as the finals. So make sure that you understand what your big milestones are, and make sure that you still have the stamina to go through that entire race or of a semester. So for me, it was like
Mm-hmm.
going out, hanging out with my friends, but for you, it might be something totally different, like a hobby or something.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really learn how to have fun. And another thing is that you also have to really understand how you learn best. So
Mm-hmm.
um, one of the key things is to be able to learn efficiently as well. The ways that you studied, the method that you used to study and acquire information in high school might not be sufficient for the pace during university. So going through that entire process is very important. Like one of the key things that I learned was that um, I need to not lie to myself when I was like studying. I would far too easily end up going to the solutions of every single time. So really understanding how you learn best. Where for me it was uh, making sure to not always go to the solutions right away and draw like if it's like a physics problem, like start off by start off with the fundamentals, like draw free body diagrams or whatever. So really getting that process down was really important, and it sets you up
Mm-hmm.
for success in the future.
Yeah, no, I think you you really hit on the head there. I think that's all I have to say too about this, about the process. And so, all right, let's transition a little bit now. So we talked about Waterloo. Now let's talk about your current job at Apple, and some of the just. I know one of the biggest questions people are going to have is what are some tips about getting a job at Apple? How is the process like, etc. So let's why don't you share some of your experiences trying to get a job at Apple, and then some of the tips you might have.
For sure. I think so. What I'll talk about first is more specific to Waterloo students. So if whatever your like dream co-op might be, I think it's very important to at the beginning of your internship, uh, like have an idea of what you want to do at the end, and that will help you kind of direct yourself and your time to get to that final destination. So if you're like into software, and let's say you look at a job like Google or Facebook, and it requires these sets of skills, you then look at that and kind of start thinking about how you can kind of get those relevant experiences so that you can kind of line yourself up to be that perfect candidate in the future. And
Mm-hmm.
specifically, sorry, to Waterloo, is that in your first few co-ops, make sure that you really understand how to be a good employee. Um, and one of the big things that you should really strive for all the time is to get outstanding. So that's one of the big things that I know Apple does look at from Waterloo students. Can't believe I'm giving out some of these gems, but like literally, they're not looking solely at your grade. Some of these companies do look at only some of the top uh, students in terms of grades, but you really don't need the best grades. You really need to, especially if you're a wealthy student, you need to make sure that you get outstandings in your co-ops leading up to like whatever your final job is, because that really sets you apart. It's the first thing that the employer sees when they're going through your resume. So seeing like several outstandings really help your case and make them want to like look at your resume for a like longer, especially if uh, the other students don't have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really make sure that your co-ops leading up to your final, or you're like, yeah, like your fifth or sixth co-op, make sure that you have the experience that will make you a great candidate, and make sure
Mm-hmm.
that your whatever work you've done in the past has like can speak for itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah,
So let's talk about for general non-Waterloo students, or just like for everybody. What are some tips you might have, like about Apple as a company, and specifically like I guess because you're iPhone quality manager, talking about specific to that role, perhaps like how some tips for that, or just in general for any role at the company.
yeah. I think really for specific for what I'm doing, it really helps if you first have some technical background. Really depends
Mm-hmm.
from time to time what exactly they're looking for. Sometimes they're looking for someone who can do some of the hands-on failure analysis. Sometimes they're looking for someone who can do some of the data analysis that they need, or sometimes they just need like an overall candidate that can do a lot of what the team needs. So for me, I
Mm-hmm.
think what made me stand apart was my previous experience in project management. So I've had
Mm-hmm.
multiple co-ops where I've led a bunch of projects, and I think that's something that they really liked. Having an experience with that can really put your foot in the door if you're, especially in a role like program manager, where a lot of times you're dealing with people, making sure that you can drive some of these projects to completion, presenting to like stakeholders, and also managing stakeholders. Having all that experience is great. Um, I really can't speak to how you can be a very prospective candidate if you don't have a lot of those experiences, especially if you're a Waterloo student.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that those are the skills that I think kind of set me apart.
Hmm. Okay, cool. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Yeah, to add on to that, I know like there's this mental drain that a lot of kids go through. When they're trying to find a job at Apple or at these big companies. So I was just wondering, like, what are your thoughts on that? Especially like this concept of Cali or bust, which is very popular with Waterloo kids.
Yeah, like Cali or bust, the infamous like um, the phrase or like saying is, I think it shows the good as well as the bad at Waterloo. Like with us, we're really not, or like for me specifically, I'm not really competitive with regards to like what my grades are, like
Mm-hmm.
versus my classmates. Like my class is totally fine with like sharing notes, so that we can help each other out, getting good grades so that we could like end up passing and like finishing the semester, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we're really cooperative in terms of like lending a help there. But like at Waterloo, there's definitely a huge competition with regards to um, future employment, and people end up becoming very, very like it's very, and not to kind of say that you shouldn't be, but it's what I'm just saying is that it's like a matter of fact where people are very competitive about like what jobs you're getting, as well as
Mm-hmm.
uh, like how like people won't really help you in terms of some people won't really help you in terms of getting uh, interviews at specific companies. They won't tell you about some of the questions that they ask. So like for me, going through that process was kind of difficult, because there's so much pressure that I've like put on myself to get some of these jobs, and like everybody else is already also in the same boat, and it really ends up it really builds an atmosphere where during the school semester, you're not only stressed about like your classes, but you're even more stressed about like finding a good co-op. And for me, like
Mm-hmm.
finding a good co-op was more important than getting good grades. So like some of us, we actually like ditched school to prepare for some of these interviews. So I think like, one of the things that I can like say to any Waterloo student that might be feeling this is that it's okay for you to feel like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to an extent, it is kind of good to be under the pressure to perform. But I think I've seen a lot. I think I've seen this take a negative, go negative for a lot of the people who can't really take this stress well, and
Mm-hmm.
people end up putting way more stress than they should on getting some of these good co-ops, right? And
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's important for you to kind of like sometimes take a step back and just realize that it's just a co-op, although it may have a huge impact on like what your first job is. You're not going to stop like your opportunity for finding a better job or doing anything in your life doesn't really end once you graduate, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so important to kind of keep that in mind,
Yeah.
because like I'm someone who fell victim to this as well, where like you just end up becoming so. It's like the story of Moby Dick, becomes such a problem when you're like chasing it so hard, right? But I think
Mm-hmm.
what you should do is take a step back and realize that like it's just a co-op. It like sometimes you shouldn't take yourself so seriously, and also what this can actually do is really hinder your confidence, and that's something that I really want to put out there for you walking into some of these interviews. The employer can really sense how much confidence you have. And for them, it's very important that you're able to be very confident so that they don't have to kind of handhold you going through this, like during your internship. So
Right.
having that confidence and pretending like you actually can do this job, even maybe if you can't, can actually
Yeah.
work hugely in your benefit. What are your thoughts on
Mm.
that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Like first part you said, I think sometimes the like some competitive sub level of competitiveness is good, don't get me wrong, but I think sometimes it goes over the edge. Like, man, like, like me and Zulphkar have interviewed for the same jobs before in the past, but like we've always made it a point that that doesn't matter. Like, we're not going to let that affect, like, at the end of the day, I want to see him get the job too, right? Like even if I don't get it, I want to see him get the, like, it's vice versa, right? And so
Yeah,
that's sort of where I'm trying to go at. Where like you have to, at the end of the day, you have to realize this is like a co-op position. Yeah, you might want it bad. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, like don't let it completely devalue everything else you have, and don't just completely make everything surrounded towards it. Like, and I know that might be easy to say now, but like I preach that even beforehand, from day one. Like a job is still a job at the end of the day, and so try to put that in perspective, and that sort of leans to the second part that Zulfgar talked about, the confidence part. I think, and I've been victim to this in the past, but when I put too much importance on, like, on, oh my god, like this is what I wanted all my life, the dream company, like when I start putting that importance onto the job, which wasn't there, like some level of the importance is
yeah,
good, but when I start putting that added stress and stuff that I don't need to put onto that, like additionally, that's when I start breaking down a little more, and in the interview I start getting nervous, and all the prep starts like going out the window because I started putting undue pressure on myself. And so with that, like that's
yeah,
definitely a great second point you also brought up there.
yeah. That kind of like you talking about that kind of reminded me of like how I ended up getting this job. So before the semester that I interviewed for this job that I'm currently working, I ended up getting like two Apple interviews then, and at the time it was just really no expectations for me to like do well. It was just like nice, I'm like going the right direction, and I ended up doing I think fairly well in one of the interviews that I felt pretty qualified for, which was like an engineering program manager role,
Mhm.
but I didn't end up getting it. And actually, one of the things that did lead that did happen afterwards is that I ended up getting a job like at my like at one of my favorite companies before going to Waterloo, Bombardier. And I was like, "Yo, dude, this is trash." Like I wanted that, and it's so bad because like it's so important to kind of like in hindsight to be appreciative of the co-ops that you end up getting. Um, like you might want like a specific co-op at the end, but you really should cherish the steps you take in order to get to wherever your destination may be.
Mhm.
So like really appreciate that. And so going back to my story, sorry. Um, During like that semester, sorry, the semester where I ended up getting this job, um, I had two interviews that week. One for an EPM, and the other for the job that I ended up getting. And the night before the EPM interview, I haven't really actually ever been so nervous where as to I couldn't really talk. We were just like Daivik, me, and Devi were like practicing in my room for some of these interviews, and it came a moment where I literally blanked out so many times and I couldn't even start. And I was like, "Holy crap, I can't be like
Yeah.
this." And that was like me wanting to get the job so bad that it really hindered my confidence. And
Yeah.
I didn't end up doing too bad during the interview, but I really shouldn't have like been as nervous as I did because it did actually impact my performance. After
Hmm.
I finished that interview, I didn't like it didn't go as intended or it didn't go as well as I thought. I ended up just being like, yo, whatever, like it's just an interview. And
Yeah.
I ended up feeling a lot more comfortable and a lot less nervous when I went into the interview the next day. And that interview for me was like one of my best interviews to date. So,
Hmm.
um, really important to stress that confidence is a
Yeah.
big thing.
100%. And I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that you're interviewing with like even though you have all these big names, at the end of the day, the other person on the other side is another person who was on who was an interviewee at a certain time in the past too. So you got to keep that all in mind, keep it
Exactly.
in perspective. It's not like it's a a big, not a big momentous occasion, right? Like you're just interviewing. It's a normal thing. It's fine. Um, and yeah, okay, cool. I think that really hits a lot of the points I wanted to talk about there. So let's shift a little bit to talking about Apple as a company, and now that you work there, let's talk maybe about the company culture a little bit. What's exciting for you down the pipeline in Apple, and of course, keeping your NDA in mind. And then yeah, just about the company in general. So let's start off with how is the company culture and what are you excited about?
Um, it's unreal. Like for me, I worked at Apple Park, and that's one of the coolest experiences that you can have. Like in one of the most interesting buildings in the world. I really like. I've really enjoyed my time working at Apple, and it's so special because it as a company, I really kind of sync with the message that they have and what their like goal is. Um, and for me, working on the iPhone team, it's it's so interesting to be able to work on a product that you see so many people use. For me, that's something that I think is very important. Uh, like,
Hmm.
and it kind of motivates me. It motivates me to do even better in my job, and
Hmm.
it's really cool because like I'm on the iPhone quality, and um, when I so if anybody like has any issues with an iPhone, like for me, like I actually now am really interested in like what is actually happening, what's causing that issue, or like just people commenting on what their experiences are, and it really has a lot of impact as to like how I like some of the. It's sometimes what they're talking about could have direct implication with what we might be trying to like improve in the future. But it's just really interesting to be working on a product that like a lot of people use.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
no, mhm.
like yeah, like working with the people like on my team. I've
Mhm.
worked at like multiple different like companies, Bombardier, like a multinational, but working at Apple, the people are like really smart, and that's like putting it into like that's not really doing it justice. Like the people
Yeah.
are so good at understanding, not only solving problems, but what makes them really special is being able to first understand what the problem is, whether that is by communicating to others or doing the investigation by themselves. They're really good also at like getting into the nitty gritty technical aspect and trying to find the root cause of a specific issue. And third, they're super good at presenting whatever the findings are. And
Mhm.
like having that triple threat is just makes you such a good um, candidate or like an employee anywhere, not only just for specifically for engineering, but I really appreciate the fact that the people that I get to work with are some of the most the smartest people in their respective fields. So I'm
Mhm.
really appreciative of the fact that I have this opportunity right now.
Mhm. No, that makes complete sense, and I can really relate to the product type of thing. I think when I'm talking to a lot of other people, sometimes like the biggest thing that they stress is like this that the biggest thing that they're looking for rather than their actual like stuff that they're working on is sorry rather than the actual product that they're working on is usually like they want a great team with really smart people and they want interesting work that they're interested in. But for myself, um, alongside with that, it's actually the product that I'm working on. And I know, and honestly, like I know for myself, like if it's a product that I'm not really interested in or I don't really believe in, then my productivity or my willingness to do work honestly sort of goes down because of that. So it's definitely like a big aspect for me, the actual stuff I'm working on, alongside, of course, having a great team, great culture, and doing some interesting work. And so it's great. Like it's cool to hear that that's also some of the stuff you value as well. Um,
Yeah, like
but
I worked at a startup where like we made like web services for like tracking vehicles at GoFleet. And really, I tried to do my best, but like I didn't really get that sense of accomplishment when I worked there. And also when I worked at Bombardier, working on these private jets was really cool, but it kind of, I didn't really like the fact that I was making, like, I was working on a project that only benefited like the ultra rich, the
yeah, like
billionaires of the world. And I was like,
yeah,
screw that. I actually would rather like work on some of these commercial planes so that like more
hmm
people can like use this. And
hmm
with something like an iPhone, like that's something that a lot of people can benefit from. So I'm really passionate about that.
yeah. No, that's definitely makes sense. Yeah, cool. So can let's transition again. So you're a PM, you're a quality manager. So I was just wondering, in general, what are some tips you have for students who want to be PMs? What are some things that they can put on their resumes? How should they approach the interview? Because I know you've done interviews for your PM positions in the past as well, so you should have good insights into that.
Yeah, so making me throw out some more gems. As with regards to resumes, I don't like for PM specifically, there isn't anything specific I'd say, but just what would be really nice is first if you had like think of yourself always when I give resume advice. I'd say always think of yourself as like the employer, right?
hmm
What do you think they would like when they're hiring someone? So if you have first great experience in leading projects, developing like planning planning a project out and executing that, working with stakeholders, and being able to really show the impacts that you've made on your resume. That's a great start. Like actually, that's probably like one of the best things that you can do. Like right, so always when you're writing a resume, make sure that that really comes out clear for the employer when they're looking at it. And like for me, it's easy to say that, but I feel like some people still don't really understand it that well. So like
hmm
what I would say is like read through each line on your resume. Does it really does it have is it impactful? Is it really worth keeping that line on? Does it have will it make your employer or a future employer look at your resume for like 5 seconds more or read another line? And that's really the goal that you should always be trying to partake when you're writing your resume. So really think of whatever they're trying to find, and you can use their job description as an example, or like to understand what they're looking for. Are they interested in like lean manufacturing? Are they interested in or are they working with a specific type of product? If that's the case and you've experience with that, always great to kind of mention that you have experience working with similar projects or similar type of scenarios. Like if you're if it's an agile development role, or sorry, an agile PM Scrum Master, if you have experience with that, being in agile format, even if you were a software developer, it's great to write that down um, and say that you've kind of worked in the setting, right? Um, and I think we go into a lot more detail in our previous podcast with regards to this, but I think for a PM, there isn't anything like really specific. Like you don't need to have like a GitHub repo, or if you were like a mechanical engineer, you don't really need like a design portfolio. But uh, some of these things, if they're useful or if they are related to whatever work that you're like going to be partaking, it would be great to kind of showcase that as well, your technical aspect. Um,
Okay.
so, and what else? Approaching to the interview, and I think what's another thing that's really good is reading "Cracking the PM." I think that's
Yeah,
the
that's the
name of
one
the
I
book.
always had.
Yeah, like that. That book is like really good, and it's like sister to that, or like its parent, cracking the coding challenge or whatever.
Coding
That book
interview.
is
Yeah.
really good too. Coding interview. So I think it's really important to kind of go through that, especially if you're kind of rusty on your interview skills. That's been like 4 months or whatever. It's always good to revisit that, read it, and that's actually one of the things that I used actually to get in the mindset of interviewing. Because
Mm.
for me, like after not interviewing for a while, I always become super rusty, and I have to pretty much start from zero again and really put myself in that spot of actually being the interviewee. So
Mhm.
reading a book like that or going through Glassdoor and seeing what these employers ask is always a good way to kind of practice your preparing for the interview.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely great, great advice there. And to sort of like to add on to that, I think one of the biggest things that students are kind of figuring out right now is how do you, if they can't get an internship because of the current situation, how do you maximize, what you can put in your resume and the stuff you can do to gain experience into PM or in general as well. So I was just wondering, based on that, what do you think students like? What do you think students can do in order to make up for that lost experience that they might have because their internship got rescinded or because of the current situation they can't find an internship right now?
Yeah. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong or like if you have a different opinion. I think with
Hmm.
PM, it really is dependent. I think what really sets you apart is your previous experience. It's hard
Okay.
to kind of replicate that scenario of stakeholder management, um, driving a project, or dealing with any conflicts and
Hmm.
planning out a project. I think if you have, if you're in a scenario where you like don't have a co-op job this time, it's kind of hard to kind of replicate that. What I would say though is um, use this time to build on skills that you can learn individually. So, first, as I kind of mentioned previously, you have to go at this in a structured or like I like to look at it as what are some of your milestones into reaching your final goal. So, let's say your goal is um, becoming a PM at Google or Facebook for a specific product. If you're in a scenario like right now where you don't have that experience of being able to like lead projects or being working for someone to gain that experience, what you should do is break that from your final goal, break that down into more tangible items that you can kind of go at one by one. So
Hmm.
with an example like that, what you should do first is maybe gain that technical experience needed for that, right? For to be a great project manager, you not only have to be able to deal with people, but you also have to understand how to like look at some of these problems from a technical perspective. And being able to
Mhm.
do that really helps your ability to be a great PM in the future as well. So
Mhm.
if you want to be a PM for, let's say, Airbus or like Boeing, rest in peace, but like try to understand like what can you really learn by yourself right now that can help you with that. You can do if it's a more mechanical type job that you want, or a company that you want to PM for, or a petroleum company, understanding parts of that, or like building up your mechanical expertise so that you can do some of what's required in your like future job or your dream job is something that you can always work on. Like there's so many things that you can improve on during this time, and I think it's just a matter of staying motivated
Yeah.
and learning how you can best learn and have fun at the same time, because that's going to be something that's more sustainable in the future. Oh, and one thing that I also forgot is not specifically for PM, but if you're to read some of these like books on how to deal with people, these like these resources will help you in terms of like your character day to day, but also like your business entrepreneurship attitudes. So, like one of the books that I might get hate on for recommending is like How to Win Friends, or How to Influence People and Win Friends, or whatever, by Dale Carnegie. And like
Okay.
being able to uh, do that, or any other books that's related to PM, something that you can pick up as well if that's what you want.
Hmm. Yeah, and I
Have you read
think
that?
I'm I'm
You
gonna
probably have like great books that you've freaking read.
Nah, man, I have not read enough books to be completely honest. I'm a lot more of like a YouTube, like I usually go on YouTube or go on Medium and stuff like that. I should really start reading a lot more books. But to quickly add to something you said at the beginning, though, I think it is pretty hard to replicate, especially for a big company experience or like a more setup project experience. It's hard to replicate that PM's type of stuff. But at the same time, I think what you could do is that, if there is a lot of students who are doing, who are building side projects and stuff to make up for that experience, you could try being the project manager for that or the product manager for that. And at least with that, you can still have some simulation of that experience and you can get more comfortable with some of the tools that project managers use, like, Jira, Agile, Trello. Start implementing those type of flows into their projects. And I think that could be a way of building that experience. But otherwise, like I agree with what you said. Um,
That's a
definitely.
great way of leeching off people. I love it.
Well, nah, man, but I no, but the thing is, right? Like, there's a lot of people, especially like software engineering or just in general, they want to focus on the engineering and actually building part. They don't want to focus on the management part, and that's why like there's so much demand for PMs everywhere. And so with that, like if some of your buddies are like making a project and they don't want to worry about that type of stuff, you can come in and be that person, and you
Yeah,
can
no, I'm
still
just
get
giving you
that.
a hard time. I'm just giving you a hard
Yeah,
time. I think that's more applicable for larger projects, but I don't see the need for individual projects to be like that. And one thing that Daivik did mention is that, well, I don't know if he meant to say that, but doing a technical project, being able to execute it from beginning to end, that's always something that's very good too. Like being able to prioritize their time, understanding
yeah.
your entire project, and understand what are some of the blockers that you might have. How can you kind of do this entire thing so that you understand the feasibility of this entire project earlier on rather than later on. All those things will help you as well. Like you don't need to specifically do a solely do a PM position to gain some PM experiences. You can also
Mhm.
learn some of that when you're doing a more technical role as well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, cool. I think we were going to go into some more product discussions, but I think I'm going to keep that for future podcasts because I have some ideas with that, with some other people as well. And I think that could be an interesting conversation. So I think I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for coming on. I think it was definitely a very valuable podcast, and I hope that our listeners could, gain some insights into some of the stuff Zulphkar was talking about and some of the stuff we talked about in general. Do you have any last remarks or words?
No, I just want to say thanks. I think this is something really cool. I hope if you're listening this far into the podcast, you've learned something. If not, hope you had a few laughs or found it entertaining. Um, yeah, like if you guys have like if anyone's listening to this and they have any specific questions, they can kind of reach out to me uh,
Mhm.
on Facebook or something.
Yeah, and I'll leave links to Zulfkar's social media in the description so you can reach out to him if you need it.
Straight up.
But otherwise, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Stay tuned for more content. Have a lot more down in the pipeline, just figuring stuff out. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks.